Hello, good morning, everyone. Happy Saturday. I hope you guys are doing well today.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Saturday.
Happy New
Good morning.
Happy
Happy Saturday.
Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, we are at the end of the sprint.
Everyone.
Good morning. We are at the end of the sprint. And as you guys can see here, the sprint has ended because we are working in 2-week sprint. But if you are still working on your tasks, whatever tasks you are working on is fine. When I create the next sprint, just move your tasks to that sprint and continue to work on it. And for those that have completed their tasks here, what you can do is create a new issue in the new sprint and start working on the next task. So don't feel pressure that you have to be at the same level as everyone. Just continue to work at your own pace. If this is how you can go in terms of the amount of work you can do and dedicate to the project, you can do that. But what I always say is make sure that you are dedicating enough time to it in terms of you are doing it every day, and don't wait 3-4 days before you do it again. Even if you are getting your tasks done, but you are doing it every other day or every other 3 days, you are still not going to get what you need to get out of it. So it is important that you do it every day, even if it's for 1 hour, do it every day until you complete your tasks. And once you complete your tasks, you understand everything you did with that project, then you can move on to the next task. And one thing I also want to mention is as you guys are working on your tasks, for example, those of you that have completed this task, the scripts that you have used to deploy your application, you can have a repository that says scripts in your GitHub account, and you can include the scripts there. I showed you guys how you can use ChatGPT to create the README file for your repository. So you can have one repository that has different scripts in it. You can tell ChatGPT what that repository does and get it to write a good README file for that repository. So as you are completing your projects, don't forget to organize them in your GitHub repository, because it'll be easier to do now than trying to do it at the end when you have worked on 10 projects and you're trying to organize everything. So it is better to organize it as you go. I'm just going to go real quick into the next task, because for those of you that have completed your tasks for this sprint, I'll show you the next task you are going to work on, and I will also show you a quick demo on how to get started. Then those of you that are still working on your tasks yet, continue to work on your tasks. So no pressure, no need to rush to get this done. The main thing is you want to make sure, this goes for those that are still working on their tasks and those that have completed their tasks, that you understand what you are doing here. Make sure that what you completed here, you understand everything about it. Because the next thing we are going to build is, we are going to take this application we are building here, and we are just going to add additional service to it, and we are building on the knowledge of what we did here. So that's why we are starting at this basic projects where you are just deploying everything in AWS. Your reference architecture, the application is not a dynamic application, so it is just a regular static HTML website. In the next task, we will be deploying a dynamic web application, and that is just a step further from this application. So if you guys look through in that project, you'll see that everything is pretty much the same. It almost looks like it's a duplicate, except for we are adding new things to it. Okay. For those that have completed their tasks in Sprint 2, for your next task, this is the reference architecture that is in the course for the examples. So for every project we are doing, for every task I'm assigning to you guys, there is an example project already in your account that you can watch for reference. And the next application we are going to build is a dynamic application. And in the example that is in your project, this is the reference architecture that we use to build that dynamic application. This reference architecture is fine. In the task that I'm going to assign to you, what I want you to do is review this reference architecture and, well, review and update. You will have to update it. And what I want you to update on this reference architecture is incorporating the EC2 instance connect endpoint that we discussed last week into this reference architecture. So basically, you want to update this reference architecture. So let's say you are at your company. This is the reference architecture that you guys use to host your dynamic web app. Now AWS introduced a new service that your company wants to use. which I believe for the EIC, I've tried it, I've used it. I think moving forward, that is what everyone should use to SSH into their EC2 instance. It is much easier than creating key pairs and managing key pairs, and it also limits the amount of resources you have to create. So in this reference architecture, it is pointing to the old way we used to mainly SSH into our servers in the private subnet, because you can see here, we have Bastion host. So what I want you to do is modify this reference architecture, incorporate the EC2 instance connect endpoint wherever you feel the diagram needs to go to show that in our reference architecture, we are using the EC2 instance connect endpoint. When I was learning, a big part of my understanding then was building a reference architecture like this. So all the reference architecture you guys see, I built everything, and it was based on the project that I was doing. So when you are working on your project, I want you guys to always think of the research you have to do, the building of the reference architecture. Don't just always focus on deploying and seeing your application. That is almost the last thing you have to do. Some of the first things you have to do is doing research, writing notes, documenting things you need for the application to function properly, and certainly creating your reference architecture. Building a reference architecture, even if you do it one time, I recommend that for every project you do, build a reference architecture for that project that just shows what is going on in that application. So for the next application we are going to build, this is the reference architecture for it. And I'm saying for that application, we are not going to use Bastion host anymore. We are not going to manage our SSH keys anymore. We are going to use the EC2 instance connect endpoint. And I want you to incorporate that into this reference architecture. So whatever we have on this reference architecture now that you feel we need to remove, since we are introducing the EC2 instance connect endpoint, remove it. Whatever you feel we need to add it. That is what you would have to figure out. And what you have to do is not far off at all, because I'm actually cheating by giving you the reference architecture. But since it is already done, I don't want to tell you to just create one out of the thin air. I'm still kind of like giving you a good starting point. And I want to see how you can review this reference architecture and say, okay, since I want to use EIC, I need this here, I need this here, and I need this here. That's what I want to see. So for your next task, you'll be redesigning this reference architecture for this application, which is hosted on an EC2 instance. Then you will be creating two reference architecture, because moving forward, this is what we are going to focus on. Once you finish your reference architecture, these are the applications you are going to be building, one using an EC2 instance and one using Docker. It will be the same application, but you are going to be building it using different resources. We will start by deploying the application on an EC2 instance. Then once we are done with that, there's a reason why I want you to deploy the application on an EC2 instance, because you learn a lot from working on that project, because you guys already saw the process of writing your script, testing it on the EC2 instance, verifying that your script works. You learn a lot that way. So that is why I always want to start you guys on the EC2 instance. But when you are done with the EC2 instance, we move on to the Docker, and moving on to the end of the project, where you have completed all the tasks you are supposed to complete, we'll focus more on the ECS one, because that is a good knowledge you should have. So the first reference architecture I showed you is redesigning this one, which the application will be hosted on an EC2 instance. The second reference architecture you are going to create is this one, which is literally identical to the first one I showed you, except for this project, we are using ECS service instead of EC2 instance. So again, I want you to update this reference architecture that we are going to be using the EC2 instance connect endpoint in our VPC and for this application. The EC2 instance connect endpoint is to SSH into an EC2 instance. This is an ECS service. It is not an EC2 instance. We don't have to SSH into it, but I still want you to incorporate that into your VPC, because there might be a need for you to use it to, as a matter of fact, you would be using it not to SSH into your ECS Fargate, but if you choose other method while you are working on the project, to use it to migrate resources, to use it to connect to your RDS instance, because we have to migrate the SQL script for our database into the RDS instance. That is one thing you can use the endpoint for. So for those two reference architecture, I can tell you now that majority of the services you see here stays. So basically you are just redesigning this reference architecture. Then I want you to incorporate the EC2 Instance Connect endpoint, whatever you feel that we need to add, and whatever you feel that is on this reference architecture that needs to be removed. That is it for the next task you are going to be working on. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. I would put this reference architecture in the Slack channel so you guys can have access to it and you can start working on your tasks. And once I create the new sprint, you can go in there, create your ticket and start working on it. So that brings me to my demo. If you want to create a reference architecture, I've opened one of this reference architecture I'm giving you as a starting point, and I've just put it on my other screen. So if you want to create a reference architecture, a good site to use is draw.io. So once you come to this site, it is very simple. The first diagram that is on my reference architecture is AWS Cloud. So in the search box here, type AWS Cloud. Once you type AWS Cloud, you get all these results. And if you click View More Results, you can see more results here. You can select any one you want. I like this AWS Cloud one. I'm going to select it. Once you select it, it is going to drop it on your screen. When you drop it, you can click it to click out, or you can select it again to select it. Once you select it, you see all these blue dots around it. All you have to do is just drag it, drag the corner. You can drag any of the blue dots. So these blue dots you are seeing, there are two things they do. If you put your mouse over it, right, you see how I'm getting that little double-headed arrow? That means that you can drag it. So you just click and hold and drag it. That's all I'm doing. Then the other thing I want you to know is when you select it, for every arrow, you will see this arrow that's pointing out. If you click that arrow, that is how you bring out the lines that points to other things. So every one of this, when you click on it, every one of these blue things, well, maybe not the corner, but every one of these four corner blue things will have the arrow that if you click on the arrow, you can bring out the arrow to point to other things, but we will talk about that later, but I just want to mention it now. So the first thing I want to build is my AWS Cloud, and I've done that here. You can drag it, make it as big as you want. And if you feel you want to design your reference architecture like this, you can also do it like this, where instead of working horizontally, you are working vertically. I like working horizontally, but maybe for the next one I build, I'm going to do it vertically. So that's the first thing. Then the next one I want to create is region. So here I can just type, let me type AWS region. And see when I type AWS region, I have all these search results. If you hover over it, this is one region, this is another one, this is another one. I like this blue one. I'm just going to click it. Once I click it, it drops it there. I'm just going to drag the four corners. So to zoom in and out, I'm just scrolling on my mouse. As you add more resources into your reference architecture, you might need to drag this out a little bit more and click on this, drag this here. One thing that will happen is if you add a resource, right? Let's say first I add the AWS Cloud, then I add the one for the AWS region. If you want to modify the AWS Cloud one, because it is expanded out, I can do that now. But sometimes what will happen is one resource is going to be on the other one. And when you try to point to the one in the back, it will be selecting the one on the top. So here, if you select any of this and right click on your mouse, there are other options for that resource here. So here you can move this resource, you can move it to the front, you can move it to the back. You can bring forward, you can send backwards. So when you are getting that issue of not being able to select what you need to select, just select the resource that you are selecting. You can send it to the back or bring to the front, whatever you need to do. So I've added the region. The next one I want to add is the VPC. So here I'm going to type VPC. Press enter. You get your search results. You can hover over it. I like this VPC. I'm going to select it and I'm going to just add it in here. For these lines, if these lines are too thin for you, you can select them. And here, there's more options. If you click up here, it increases the size of the line. Down, it reduces it. So the more point it is, the thicker the line gets. Also, if you want to change the color of the line, you can select the color, change the color. And for this AWS region, I can increase the size of the line. For the VPC, I'll do this. If you want to edit the words, just double click on it. You can change the size of the font here, and you can also make it bold, do whatever you want to do. It's the same for all three. Once you've created your VPC, the next thing I want to do is create my availability zones. So here, I'm going to type, once I type availability zones, you can see I got that result. And there's also this one. There's also this one. I like this one because it has more detail in it. I'm going to select it. And I can just do something like this. You'll figure out what method you want to use to work, whether you want to work from the inside out or outside in. Because I tend to work from the outside in, then I will realize I need more space, then I'll have to keep dragging things out. So for now, I'm just going to use this. Then if you want to change the color, I'm going to select this. I like using the orange for the availability zone. I'm going to change the color to orange. Then I'm going to increase the size. Because we are working in two different availability zones, and we need two of these things. Sorry, I haven't been looking at the chat. Okay. Yeah, draw.io is free. I'll give you guys the link. So it's free. You don't have to pay for it. Since we are working in two different availability zones and we need to create another one here, what I have to do is select this one. Once you select it, right click on it and select duplicate. So it duplicates it. All you have to do is drag it down. And when you drag it down, it tracks the other one to make sure you are aligning them evenly to each other. And that's all you have to do to create the two availability zones. Then we've created our availability zones. Then we need to create our subnets. Here, I'm going to type subnets. You can see I got a bunch of results. If you hover over it, this is a private subnet, this is a public subnet. So I want to create my public subnet first. I'm going to select it. See what I mean? When I create the subnet and I try to select it, I select the wrong one. So if this happens, just press Ctrl-Z to bring it back to the previous. Make sure you select the right one. Once you select it, click and hold it, and you can drag it wherever you want to drag it to. You might have to play around with your spacing just to make sure everything looks good. But for demo purpose, I'm not going to worry about the spacing. Once you create your subnet, we need two of it. Or what I could have done actually is delete this availability zone. I need subnets here. I can drag this out a little bit. Bring this down. Drag this out. So I need a public subnet. I've done that. See how I'm trying to, one thing I found is the best way to select any of these things is select it wherever the name is. If you select it here, it will be easier to select it. But if you try to select it in the middle, it will select something. So try to select it wherever the name is. So I've had my public subnet. I need two private subnets. I'm going to select the private subnet here, drag it there. Then I'm going to duplicate and put it here. Once I'm done, I can select all these resources. To select everything, I'm holding the Control key, and I'm selecting this one, this, and this. You can see I've selected all four. And another thing you can do is you can group this together. Once you are sure that this is the spacing you need, and you are not going to adjust your spacing, if you want to group it, you can right-click on it and select Group. Now it has grouped these things together. So that is how you group resources. So now if I select that and I duplicate, it is going to duplicate the group. So there are different ways you can work on it. You can just play around with it until you are satisfied with what you want. And if you want to ungroup, you can select the group again, right click on it, and you'll see ungroup here. You can ungroup it. That is that. I'm very picky when I draw reference architecture. I think I'm probably secretly have OCD or something, but even though I'm not diagnosed with one, but I'm very picky about wanting something that I'm working on to look clean. So when I'm working on this, I'm always adjusting it here and there. So here, I'm just going to drag this out. I think that looks good. Then we've done the availability zones. We've done the public and private subnets. Then I'm going to just add one more resources into this. Then you guys have to finish it yourself using the example. The next thing I want to add is, let's say I want to add an EC2 instance into my private subnet. going to type EC2 here, press enter. Then I like this EC2, or if you scroll down, you'll see more results. Certainly this one is good. I'm going to use it. See how as I'm adding resources to it now, there might be a need to drag things out. That is one thing that I've always struggled with, sizing it correctly. Or if you want, you can make this smaller. Once you add your EC2, one thing I want you guys to do is for every resource you add, make sure you add a name for that resource. So once you add the EC2, you can come here under this plus and select text. It is going to add a text here. If you can see it, it is here. I'm going to double click on it and just type EC2. Then if you want to make it bigger, I'm just going to select it. Here, this is the size. I'm just going to increase the size. I'm going to bring it up here. Obviously, that text is too big but for demo purpose, I'm showing you. Then if you want to group the two together, you can select your EC2 instance, hold the control key, select the text, right click, and group it. So now if you move the EC2, the word moves with it. Then if you want to duplicate it, right click, duplicate, drop it here. Then this is where the arrow thing, I'm going to create one more resource. Let's say I want to create an RDS instance. Type RDS. I like this one. Let me see if there's other ones. There's this one. I like this one. I'm going to select it, drop it here, and I'm going to reduce the size. So that's what I'm saying. Now you have to be very careful when you are selecting it. I've created my RDS instance. Now, if I want this EC2 to point to the RDS, I'm going to, even though I said this is bothering me the way it is there, I'm just going to ungroup. I'm going to bring this here. I'm going to reduce the size. Okay. So now that I have my EC2 instance, if I want to demonstrate that this EC2 instance is accessing this RDS instance, remember what I said, you select it, you select the resource, make sure you've selected, you see all the blue dots around it. So from this side, I want to create an arrow that points here. So if maybe this is one of the tricky thing about grouping it, because when you group it, it's tricky. You don't really see those arrows. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to ungroup it. So now if I select the EC2 instance, I'm going to zoom in. Here, there should be those arrows. I'm not sure why it is not showing up. It is probably because I'm using the grouping thing. So okay, it is showing up, but it's showing up for this particular resources, I don't think they have it. Well, the arrow is only showing up on one side. So if I select it here, for some of those resources, the arrow shows up everywhere. But I think for this one, they only did it on one side. So if you select it here, it still doesn't matter. Just select it wherever the arrow is showing up. All you have to do is touch whatever you want to touch on the side you want to touch it. So here, I'll touch this RDS instance and it will just create that arrow for you. Then you can modify the arrow however you want. If you select the line here, you get more options for it here, whatever you want to do with it. And the same thing goes for this. I can select it here. Then I'm going to ungroup it. Once I ungroup it, I'll select the EC2 instance. Then find the arrow. Somehow the arrow is not showing up. I select it. I'm not sure why the arrow is not showing up for this. So let me try to select it again. There you go. Okay. Maybe this is another feature that I'm not aware of. So if you hover over it, I didn't even select it. I'm hovering over it. The arrow is pointing out again. So you can do the same thing and you can just select it. Actually, I think this is better than selecting it. So what I'm doing is hovering over it and I get all those little X around it. You see the arrow, just drag it out and you can adjust this however you want. And this is pretty much how you create your reference architecture. For the next task, use draw.io to build out your reference architecture. Update the reference architecture to use the EC2 instance connect endpoint. Once you are done with the two reference architecture, then I will give you the application code for the next task you are going to deploy. You will use whatever reference architecture you have come up with to deploy the application. But I'm telling you that the reference architecture is not too different from the original one that I've given you. You just have to incorporate the EC2 instance connect endpoint, remove whatever resources that are on this reference architecture that needs to be removed. Then once you have your reference architecture approved, you'll get the application code to start deploying your application using the reference architecture. So that is it for me. For demo, do you guys have any questions?
Hi, Aziz. I just want to verify with the two architectures that you showed to us earlier. did you mean that we need to, you purposely remove some components there and you want us to add something there, like the endpoint? Is that, did I understand it right?
I didn't remove anything. The reference architecture that I'm showing you now, this is the reference architecture for our projects. It is correct. There's nothing wrong with this reference architecture. But what I'm saying is, moving forward, we want to use the EC2 Instance Connect endpoint. So the EC2 Instance Connect endpoint is not on this reference architecture. So we have to update this reference architecture to include the new service that we want to start using. And also, if there is anything on the current reference architecture that has to go away because we are using something else now, remove it from the reference architecture.
Okay.
The main point of this exercise is, for the application you are building, you want to make sure you understand what services you are using in that application and how those services connect to each other. That is the main point of building a reference architecture. So you're looking at the reference architecture, you can say, oh, for this application, we are using S3 here. This is where we store this, and this is what we are using it to do. We are using Bastionos because it does this. This is how you guys build your talking points for your interview. This is how you can confidently speak to anyone about AWS because you've designed it. You know how the project you worked on works. Interview is really not about, they ask you a question about what is EC2, what is this? From the conversation you have during your interview is how a good interviewer will be able to tell that, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about, or this lady does not know what she's talking about. And you get those knowledge to be able to speak about the AWS services and what you are doing from building the reference architecture. As a matter of fact, my first couple of interviews, I used to print the reference architecture for my project. I would put it in front of me. And when they asked me to talk about things I've worked on, I just explained that reference architecture. That is what I used to do until now I can explain the reference architecture without looking at it. This is a big part of the learning experience that a lot of people ignore because we just go straight to launching an EC2 instance. No, when you build an application, you need to be able to talk about the application and the services you are using in your reference architecture that built the application. And also think about it this way. Most of the companies you guys are going to get your job at, they've already built the application. The application is already there. Unless if there's a new project coming in where they need to build a new application, there's a new reference architecture for it. That is almost rare. In most cases, the company would already have their environment, the reference architecture is built, and the services are deployed. You are just managing it and adding new things to it. And this is one of the things you'll be doing. If they want to add a new service, you would have to update the old reference architecture if they assigned it to you. And you will also have to come in for the first time and be able to interpret the reference architecture they've given you and say, okay, here I see we are using NAT gateway, application load balancer. The application load balancer is routing traffic to the web servers. You'll be able to look at the reference architecture and pretty much understand what your application looks like at your company. That is the importance of working on a project where you create your reference architecture. It's a good exercise. Does anyone else have any question?
Hi, Aziz. Do you think it's more appropriate if we apply for junior DevOps engineer first before going for cloud engineer, especially for the beginners and does not have any solid IT background? What do you think?
Apply for whatever position you feel you can do. It's based on reading the job description. And if you are confident that you can do the work, apply for it. But I won't say specifically, I don't know how many junior DevOps roles out there. And I won't say specifically look for junior DevOps role. The projects you guys are working on, things you guys are doing, building this reference architecture, you understanding how to deploy everything in this reference architecture, you can explain to someone that doesn't have IT background. That is your understanding. Everything you are doing here is preparing you to be a normal cloud engineer. By the time you work on this project, work on the ECS one, work on the Terraform one, there's still a lot of stuff we have to do. That, be confident in the things you've done. If you've done your part to say, okay, I did this project, I understand it. Quiz me on anything about this project, I'll ace it. If you can do that, you can apply to a regular cloud engineer role. You don't want to apply to a junior role where you have to take significant pay cut, but then at the end of the day, you find out that you're still doing regular cloud engineer work. So I'm saying trust the process, trust the things you are doing, and don't limit yourself to just junior.
All right. Thank you so much. That makes a lot of sense now.
Yeah.
Aziz, hello.
Yes, please raise your hand so we
Okay,
won't
sir.
be talking over each other. I don't know who's first, but Tisha, you can go ahead.
Okay. Aziz, please, could you explain to me the difference between step function, AWS step function, and this reference architecture? Are they the same thing? Thank you very much.
The AWS step function, let me look it up. That I don't know.
The reason why I'm asking because I kind of filled a skilled matrix, right, for a job I applied for, and one thing I saw was AWS step function. So what came to my mind was reference architecture. I don't know whether I'm correct.
Yeah, I haven't used the
what I'm
AWS. I haven't used the AWS step function before, but it's new to me. I'll look it up and I'll get back to you. But it's definitely, it seems like a AWS step function, serverless orchestration for modern their application. So I have to look into this step function to see what it does. So if it's just a reference architecture, so it seems like just from looking at this is a way to visualize your application by using code. So it is taking this a step further and writing codes for it. But at this point, I wouldn't say it's something you need to worry about. I mean, if you have time to be able to do it, that is fine. But for all the knowledge of things you need to know there, certainly whatever you guys are saying on the job description, every job description is going to have different things. Some you've seen, some you've not seen. I've worked in the field. I've never used AWS step function. So it is fine. The main thing you want to look for is when you are looking at a job application that it centers around these skills. I'm saying that if you have these skills, Linux, Git, AWS, understands Python, Terraform, Docker, CI/CD, Ansible, these are the core skills that I'm always using from day to day, regardless of the projects that I'm on. If you look at the job description and you see that majority of the skills that are required on it are centered around these services, then feel confident that, okay, this is a job that I can do. Don't focus on like the one or two things on it that you might not understand, or because majority of the job description, I'll say they will have a bunch of stuff on it, but your day-to-day is pretty close to doing the same thing. You are not doing the same exact thing, but whatever you are doing is very similar. You might be working in Terraform a lot. You might be updating something in your CI/CD pipeline. You are pushing code into the code update into the repository. You are researching new AWS services that your company wants to use. So everything is pretty much centered around this. So if you see it on a job description, I wouldn't worry about learning it unless if you have time to learn it. But I'll say learn it after you've mastered majority of this, if not all of this. Yeah, but it seems like it is a way to use code to visualize your reference architecture.
Thank you very much, Aziz.
No problem. All right, I can't see my screen. I don't know who has their hands raised, but the next person can go. I'm trying to get back to my. Okay, Thierry. No, I think Olariwaju was first. You can go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Yeah, so what I wanted to ask like two things. First, I was looking at the roadmap for the 6-month program, and I was currently like, I'm already subscribed to like your mentorship, and I can't find the Kubernetes project. I don't know if your plan is like put that later.
I don't have the Kubernetes project yet.
Okay. That's
yeah,
one.
so I will work on. I don't have the Kubernetes project there, but I still include it on the roadmap for you guys as something you need to learn. So out of all the things you need to learn, I have majority of the projects except for Kubernetes that I will work on, and I shall have it in the near future. But for now, no, I don't have it.
Thank you. The next thing I wanted to ask was about firewall and CloudFront. Yeah. I did the dynamic project and I've done the EC2 one and the HTML one. I noticed that we didn't like incorporate CloudFront or like firewall. I just wanted to know at what point they come in, because I had an interview and I really could not explain the firewall part. I knew it in theory, but I didn't know it like practical. I actually incorporate into like a structure like this architecture.
Okay, yeah. So with some of the applications, every application is different at every company. Some companies might incorporate firewall, WAF, some companies may not, right? In our project, my main focus is trying to get you guys to understand at the foundation, like the core services that you need to build a reference architecture. We are not really, we've certainly add some security stuff into this reference architecture by using public and private subnets, how we are putting our resources in the private subnet. But certainly at your company, they will have CloudFront, which is a way to make their website more highly available and also have WAF in it. But I didn't use that here. The WAF might cost more, and I just didn't think it is necessary to incorporate into the project, but certainly it is good for you to know what CloudFront is used for and what WAF is used for. But it's just a choice. I chose not to incorporate into the project.
Oh, okay. So I'm just saying, because the last DNS hosting that we took for viewing our project has always been the ALB. So is it that when we attach the CloudFront, we'll pick the DNS name of the CloudFront or something? Is it we start viewing the website from the CloudFront, or like I just want to know how the structure works?
If you choose to use CloudFront, CloudFront will just be serving your application. So yes, so when people try to access so the main point of CloudFront is it makes your whatever you are trying to serve more highly available to your end users. So if you put your website behind CloudFront, one of the things it does is it just makes it highly available that if they are trying to access it from somewhere else that is not close to where you are hosting it, it would store the cache in an edge location that is closer to them for them to be able to access it later. From what I've seen, even at my company, when we just use CloudFront to store we host the static asset of the site in CloudFront. It is not in the project, but just understanding that what CloudFront does is good enough for answering any questions about CloudFront. And if they go into deeper question about what is CloudFront or its specific things, if you don't know something, you don't know it, because until you work on it, you might not know it. But certainly it is a way that I always answer those questions is I haven't worked on that before, but I'll look it up after this. But I can assure you that if it is something I need to implement while working, is something I can do. So certainly I don't know it all too. There are things that I know based on things I've worked on, things that I know based on the project. So certain things, if they are new to you, understand that you have the enough intelligence to be able to implement them. But CloudFront generally, from my understanding of it, is makes your content highly available. You can use it to serve different parts of your application. For example, we use it to serve the HTML file for our application. That's what we use CloudFront to do. And it just makes it highly available. It makes it faster for them to access it instead of, for example, someone in Nigeria trying to access an application that I hosted in Northern Virginia. So to answer your question, I would say just to prepare yourself, if you want to take this project further and implement WAF in it, you can do that, but make sure when you implement it, look at the pricing. I'm not sure which one of I don't know if it's WAF or Shield. I know one of them cost a lot. So you want to make sure that whatever you are implementing, check the price, make sure the price is not something that is going to hurt you in the long run. And if the price is going to be something that is going to be too much, I would say just understand it from a theory standpoint. The WAF even at my job, it has been there before I started that project. If I need to start working with it, I just have to brush myself off on how we are using it. What do I need to change in it to do whatever they're asking me to do? But I say understanding it from a concept standpoint is good. You don't have to necessarily implement it at this stage.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
No problem. Thierry, go ahead.
You have 5 minutes after this person. You want from?
Yeah, I can't really hear you, Thierry.
You hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you have 5 minutes after this, so I just want to run through something with you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions?
Aziz, sorry. I just saw a company who is not utilizing a public cloud, so they're hosting their own cloud. Do you think it's a good idea applying there as well? Or do you think it's better if we apply to companies who are utilizing public clouds like AWS?
Wherever you apply to is going to be based on the job description. Read the job description. On the job description, they are going to have required skills. They will have a skill that you must have to work in that position, and some skills that generally you need to. I think, how do they say? They'll say it's good to have it, but it's really not required. Look at the required skills. If it lists things you know how to do and things you can do, it aligns with the skill set you have, then apply to it. If the things they are requiring does not have that, then I will leave it alone, because most likely whatever they are requiring you to do is what they're going to need you to do. So it's based on the job description.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah. Do you guys have any other questions? Okay. So if you guys don't have any questions, if you need to reach me or you have any questions, you can post it in Slack. And remember, I'm going to start the new sprint today. So if you want to continue to work on your tasks, you can come in the Jira board, create your tasks for the next assignment and start working on it. And once you are done, just update the image just like you've done for the other one. Let me know, I'll review it and approve it. Then we'll go on from there.
You're gonna create a sprint 4, am I correct, Aziz, for the next task, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
If you are still working on this one, you can move this one to sprint 4 and continue to work it and continue working on whatever task you are working on here. So you don't have to necessarily worry about, so everyone is at different pace, so everyone should work on whatever they are working on, but you can still follow each sprint working on whatever tasks that you are currently on. Yes, so I'll create sprint 4, create your tasks in it and work on it. And I also send the details of the assignments to you. Do you guys have any other questions?
Aziz.
So far. Thank you,
Okay.
Aziz.
All right, no problem. Well,
Aziz, I have
yes.
so do we send an email to you for us to join the Jira?
Are you in a group already?
Yeah, last week we discussed it. You said since the groups are not responding, so we should and put an email there, then we can add our names there.
Okay, so I'll create another user. Yeah, I said I was going to do that last week. I haven't done it. So I'll create another user that I'll send the credentials to you that you can use to access the board.
Yes.
I'll do that today.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, shall I go ahead? I can't hear you if you are speaking. Well, we can chat later if something is wrong with your mic, because I can't hear you. Yeah, I can see you are muting, but I still can't hear you. You're probably having an audio issue. But certainly we can chat later. All right. If you guys don't have any questions, that is it for today's class. Let me know whenever you do have questions. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Bye, everyone. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aziz.
No
Yeah,
problem. Have a good
thank
weekend.
you. Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
Aziz.
Have a good day, guys. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a good weekend.